Welcome to the Encounter Grow Witness podcast, a podcast for and by missionary disciples serving and working in the Archdiocese of Detroit and way beyond the Archdiocese of Detroit to make the name of Jesus known and loved in his Catholic Church. I am your lowly sub-host, secondary host, Father Steve Pullis, and we're here with the primary rock star host, Beth Spizarny. Beth, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am doing well. We're kind of getting to the tail end of Lent here.
We are.
And it's a good time to think about what comes after Lent.
Yeah.
Right?
Easter,
yeah.
Yes.
Any Easter traditions or Easter customs, either growing up or now with your family that you have?
Yeah. Our kids are still a little small for the full Triduum.
Okay,
So we've since they were born, we have a split. I get Holy Thursday.
Okay.
My husband gets Good Friday. And we just do lots of Good Friday type things at home with the little ones. But and then
neither of you get the vigil, right?
Neither of us get the vigil. Yeah. We do the vigil together.
Too much for them,
We make a whole table and we light all these candles and then we do all the scripture readings after the kids are in bed. But we're trying to make it an exciting thing so that they want to do it with us as they get older, and then we're preparing them for the vigil. So
all right. That's fantastic.
It's sweet. And my husband's a singer, so I usually make him sing the Psalms because he usually can. He remembers the music. So, yeah. How about you?
Okay.
Easter, any special traditions?
So, one of the funny things growing up, I might have talked about this on a previous podcast that I helped with, but one of the customs growing up in our family, and it's just kind of, anyway, I've still thought of it, so obviously it left some imprint on me.
Yeah.
We would get new socks on Easter and on Christmas. And I don't know why. I kind of liked that. And I think, our family didn't have a ton of money growing up.
Sure.
We were 10 kids, and my dad worked really hard. My mom was at home. And, we never went without. We went to Catholic school, so it was great. But for some reason, that just made it a little bit special. And I mentioned that in a homily once, and someone came up to me and was like, "Oh, that's all you got for Christmas?" I was like, no, that wasn't the point at all. That's not all we got. But I seem to remember that from childhood. But now being here at Sacred Heart Seminary, it's really beautiful, kind of the tradition of the custom we have here of the Triduum, so Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday. They make it a retreat for the men here. So there's no classes. There's a priest who comes in and gives conferences. It's kind of quiet. And I oversee the liturgy here. And so we do lots of chapel cleaning during that week and in a very prayerful way. And just lots of preparing for our Lord's resurrection. So I'm really excited to be part of that this year. Kind of making this time in preparation for Easter, a beautiful time to be with the Lord.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I read somewhere, there was a post online going around about how in Christmas season, we have so many traditions.
Yeah.
There's caroling and there's cookies and there's just tons of things. Now, to be fair, most of those we stick into Advent incorrectly, but nevertheless, there's tons of things to do for Christmas. But then for Easter, there's not as many traditions, right? There's the eggs.
Yeah.
And
Easter egg
flowers.
hunt, I know, and flowers,
there's just not that many other traditions that we do in Easter season.
Yeah, there's candy baskets, but I guess that's like with the eggs too, right? That's all mixed together. Yeah, I don't know. People wear bright colors.
That's true.
They wear pastels.
That's true. But I would just encourage our listeners to think, how can we expand the celebration of Easter?
Yeah.
Because it should be a really long, really spectacular celebration.
Yeah. So
I think there's more we can do.
Not just Easter Sunday, you're saying, but the whole
season.
50 days from Easter till Pentecost.
Let's do some culture building.
Yeah.
Folks, let's make it even more spectacular. My kids have learned whenever they ask for a treat in Lent, I always say, no, we don't do those things because it's Lent. And they're kind of like, okay. And then they'll ask, they're like, are we going to have a treat today? I'm guessing not because it's Lent. And we'll say, no, we're not going to have a treat today. And then they also learn the opposite, which is, Mom, can we have a treat today? Because it is Easter season. And I'm such a softie. I'm like, it is Easter season. You know what? Sure. I think we should have more, But I'd like to have some other things besides just more candy to give them.
So you want to
anyone has ideas.
You want to build culture more than just candy during Easter. Yeah.
I do.
Yeah. That's good. That's wise. Wise, Beth.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
So we are talking today about a fun topic that I'm sure all of our listeners who are working in parishes, working in a diocese, working in any kind of Catholic apostolate have experienced probably many, many times, and certainly in the last couple of years through the COVID times. And that is working for unity when there are so many opinions and so many voices of disunity out there. Yeah. And, Beth and I were talking about this just from our own experiences and trying to lead people to Christ, help them know, Jesus Christ and put him at the center of their life, and how so many opinions and voices and people's own experiences can lead to disunity. And we thought it'd be worth talking about how we can build a culture of unity in a world that's very divided. And sometimes it feels like even a church that's divided. Yeah.
Gosh, it's so pervasive, right? And I think COVID has really frayed everyone's nerves. So I think the divisions that are just everywhere in our society have gotten deeper. Yeah.
And I know we were talking about, both of our experiences in parishes where people come up and are, feel very strongly about some COVID protocol, either that it needs to stay forever or that it's the worst thing in the world, right? And people come with such strong voices, whether it's about masking or social distancing, whether it's about having things in person or remote. Obviously,
the sanitize.
The vaccine has led to this. It's just we know, because I know for me it's been a stress and a strain, and I just hear from so many people who work in parishes what a stress and strain it can be trying to navigate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we had we were praying the Divine Mercy Chaplet outside Beaumont in the early days of the pandemic. Yeah. And because our high school is right across the street from Beaumont, and so we had the whole community come out. Everyone was in their cars, and we were praying the Divine Mercy Chaplet. The news came out to cover it, and I had a small freak out afterwards because all the high schoolers were chatting and hopping out of their cars and talking. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to be on the news. This is going to be the story. Get back in your car. Stop. I don't want to be this story.
So but you had them afraid. In their cars.
Yeah, everyone was in their cars
so that they could be social distance,
right, in the early days. Yeah. But even that, it's like there's just people then were upset that we were getting their cars. It's difficult. Yeah. It was I'm sure a difficult time for all leaders to navigate through. Not that we're done, but we're in a new season of it.
I think we're most of the way there. I hope. You never know what the future holds, but I do feel like we've turned a significant corner. I agree. And that's why I think it's helpful. And we'll talk about some other areas of disunity, but it can be really hard in the midst of it, kind of take a step back and to say, okay, how can we do this better? Yeah. Right? Because emotions are so high and people feel very strongly about it, and sometimes for really good reasons, right? Whether it's their own family experience or, about being immunocompromised, or they see the effect in their children or others of being so isolated, right? And they know like this isn't good long term and looking for a way out. And so, people often come with good reasons, but it's still as a parish, a diocese, or kind of any group like that, there have to be decisions made for the good of the whole. And not everyone's going to be happy with that. So, I think we're at a point now when we can look back and say, okay, hopefully, the temperature or the volume is down a little bit, and we can say, how do we really be sources of unity? Yeah. But it's not just COVID, right? There's so many other things.
Yes. Yeah. The same pattern we see with COVID plays out in so many other topics, right? Yeah. Politics are so volatile, especially these last many years, right? In our recent history.
Yeah. The last volatile election and everything that came after it just led to so many people having these very strong opinions and wanting their pastors or people who work in the church to kind of speak into that in a way that
affirms their perspective and no others.
Exactly.
So hard.
Yeah. So those are a couple of the topical ones, but I think we have some deeper ones about liturgical preferences. Yeah, right?
Absolutely.
People have
from music to to reverence to the Latin Mass.
Yeah, people have lots of very strong, and again, could be for very good reasons, right? Yeah. Strong perspectives on this. And it just makes it difficult to navigate as a leader. Yeah. We were talking about a couple of other areas. I know one for me I see is where people turn to for authority or where people turn to for for a voice they trust. And that can be so fractured. And some of that's the digital environment. And Archbishop Vigneron wrote a pastoral note on how to navigate that. And that's on our Unleash the Gospel page. But, a lot of that can be because I get into my bubble and I only hear voices I agree with. And oftentimes those voices are, just to be honest, they're monetized based on getting people, worked up.
That's right.
Right. And they're not always seeking the good of souls.
I had a friend who worked for one of those places that kind of creates that sort of divisive sort of content.
Yeah.
And he told me, I think he was one of the film guys that worked with them. And he said that they had figured out that if they posted something that either said LGBTQ or Pope Francis, they would get so many more likes, so many more watches compared with the other content.
Yeah.
And so they were leaning into those two things.
Those kind of those buzzwords.
There's
there's
a very specific example of what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's monetized.
And I think as we move towards, we're just a couple of months away from implementing phase 2 of Families of Parishes, which will impact every parish in the Archdiocese of Detroit. It's good to think about the challenges that come with change. Change always presents challenges.
Absolutely.
But to think about how this can be an opportunity for unity in the midst of disunity.
Yeah.
And that's going to be hard.
It's going to be hard.
But it's going to be good.
If
we do it right, it's going to be good.
Yeah. I think Sandy even shared some great things last month about collaborating within her family of parishes as they came together, right? And you do see, or we will see, and she saw, just the unity of different gifts and different charisms coming together to make something awesome, right? They needed a facility. They had a facility. Great, And I'm sure there were things beyond those things, but
I rely on Beth to be the institutional memory of our podcast because I don't always remember those things.
I'm sure. You just spout wisdom all the time. You can't keep track of it all, right? I'm sure that's it.
It is hard to keep track of all the wisdom
I'm sure.
as you so kindly say, spout.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Well, I'd say just another area of disunity, which is difficult to speak about, is just the LGBTQ issues, right? That, I think you've said before, and we've talked about that there's just unprecedented challenges in our culture right now regarding human sexuality and how we understand that and how our faith speaks to the meaning of our bodies and the meaning of our sexuality and how we live that out. And so that's also really divisive, right? Within the church, there are voices who are listening to the church and trying to be faithful to the church. And then there's voices that are just so overwhelmed by the culture that we live in and just are in a different place with those teachings.
Yeah, and I think on that there's reactionary voices in both directions too,
I would
right?
agree.
There are people who feel like the church has been not loving enough to people who are same-sex attracted.
Right.
And so they kind of speak from that place of condemnation at the church. Right. But then there are people who feel like they're being overrun by the culture that's opposed to the church's vision of Christ's vision, really, of human sexuality. And so instead of that coming out of a place of love or out of a place of like, we have great news to propose. And it might be challenging. It might not be what you want to hear, but this will lead to human flourishing.
Right.
It's kind of said in a defensive posture.
Which is hard.
Yeah. And
we did a survey last fall to ask just how welcoming are we? How can we be more welcoming? This moment, after COVID, in COVID, whatever, wherever we are. And we had those voices come out on the survey about we're just talking about welcome. And people said, well, you're not welcoming because you reject people who identify as LGBTQ. And I'm thinking, well, we don't. That's not the full teaching. And then other voices came in and they said, you're not welcoming. You're too welcoming that you've thrown out church teaching.
Yeah.
And you don't speak about matters of LGBTQ at all. Everyone thinks everything's fine. There's no sin anymore. And I thought, wow. Boy, you're both parishioners here. You see this differently.
And this is exactly what we're talking about, right? The way that there are just loud voices on both sides that want to, I don't know, maybe co-opt is the right word, maybe it's not, but co-opt the church and a parish or a priest or a lay ecclesial minister, a mission direct person in our families of parishes to kind of go in the direction they want them to. And we need to be clear enough about what we believe and convicted enough in our own relationship with Christ to say, like, we can really seek unity here, right? We don't have to think of unity as a compromise in moral teaching or a compromise in understanding the truth of, scientific realities, or it's just a compromise of our beliefs. But it does require a radical openness to the other person, and a radical confidence that God is more powerful than our disagreement here, right? I don't need to be terrified of someone who disagrees with me, or angry at someone who disagrees with me.
Right.
So as we were talking about some ways to, to work through this, to find ways we can be more united. We can seek unity. Maybe the first question to propose, and we didn't talk about this, so Beth is going to hate me for throwing this.
Please ask me a personal question.
No.
That would be my favorite.
No, not personal, but maybe foundational. Like, why is unity important? Why should we even care about it, right? Why not just do what I know is right and, forget about everyone else because I know this is right.
Some time ago, I was doing a ministry, and it was an outreach, and unfortunately, the outreach was deeply seeded with division from the outset. And I remember being a part of the outreach and just kind of going and doing it. And I was present and everything. But in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, how much fruit are we going to bear when this is how we began? I just don't think there will be as much fruit. They'll be like the fruit we see in winter, right? Like, oh, these strawberries, they're only $1. They look like strawberries. Yet they do. They look like strawberries. They just don't taste like strawberries. Right. So I think
they taste like styrofoam.
Yeah, they taste like nothing, even, So I think unity is essential, because if we want to do the Lord's will, because Christ said we should live in unity, but also I just think there won't be any fruit. So if we think what we're doing is important, and if we want to see fruit, we want to see hearts changed and people come to know Jesus in a deeper way, why would we waste our time, or why would we not rather invest in doing so in a way that begins in unity?
Yeah. No, I think you're exactly right. It's the only way to bear fruit. If we're working at cross purposes, or if people that we're called to serve are getting contradictory or conflicting messages, man, it's not just going to prevent us from going forward, but it's a scandal. And John Paul II talked about this. He wrote a whole encyclical on unity, especially Christian unity. And he talked about the great scandal that it is to propose, the gospel in the midst of unity.
You mean disunity?
Sorry.
It's cool to proclaim the gospel in unity.
Right. What a scandal it is to proclaim the gospel in the midst of disunity.
Right.
When we recite the creed at Mass, we say we believe in one holy, Catholic, and apostolic church, right? So the church, one of the defining characteristics, the marks of the church, is unity, is oneness.
True.
Because God is one, right? The beauty of the Trinity kind of always shows us this reality, right? That God is one and God is three. And if that doesn't blow our minds, we need to think about it more deeply, right? That God is three persons in one God.
Yeah.
And there's distinction among Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but there's radical unity. And this is how we understand our church, right? There's distinctions in the gifts we bring, distinctions in how we see the world in some ways, distinctions in liturgical traditions or, roles that we serve in. So there's distinction, but that doesn't mean there has to be disunity, because God himself is distinction and unity, and we're made in God's image and likeness. And so it's in our identity to be united as God himself is united, and as you said, as Christ commanded us in his church. So great job on my curveball question I didn't prepare you on. I'm sorry, Beth.
No, I was expecting more. I'm good with that kind of question.
Great. So let's talk about how we can do this. So we talked about a few principles. Beth, what's our first principle for seeking unity in our church?
Our first principle is
in our relationships.
Charity, love.
Fine.
Yeah, that's right. I was working with an Alpha table years ago, and one person at the table made a comment about, it was Trump at the time, and that was it, the whole table. Nobody ever came back. And they had dinner together, I think 4 times already. This was their 5th time having dinner together. And the next week, all 10 people, not one of them returned
because of one
political comment, either endorsing or opposing. I don't recall. And the leaders, they came back actually. So there were still 2 people at the table. But I thought, what happened to your table? Where did they go? And it was a lack of charity. in how it was spoken of and how it was received and all of that. But
and that kind of illustrates how afraid people can be, right? And how we may not think much of it, but in leadership, whether it's being a pastor of a parish or being the director of evangelization and catechesis and everything else in a parish, or whether it's an alpha table leader, right? That our responsibility to kind of help navigate people, navigate their the conversation to stay on Christ, to keep our work on Christ and not to get pulled apart from these other things. I'm teaching the fourth year seminarians, the last year men, the sacraments of healing, which are anointing of the sick and reconciliation, confession. And so we've been reading John Paul II's Reconciliatio et Penitentia, Reconciliation and Penance, an encyclical or a post-synodal apostolic exhortation he wrote on this. In the mid-'80s, early 83, 84, something like that. But he has this great line that's, from the wisdom of the church from her, her earliest years. He says, in what is doubtful, we need freedom. In what is necessary, we need unity. And in all things, we need charity. So this is just, part of this is a theological way to think of it, right? Like what the church hasn't explicitly proclaimed. So what is doubtful? There's freedom to have different opinions, right? We can approach things in different ways. And that's okay. Like, that's part of the beauty of the Catholic Church. That's why there's not just one book on the Catholic life or one book on
one spirituality,
on the saints or one spirituality, right? Because there's many different ways to within the church to find Christ, right? It's part of the beauty of the saints who have shown us this. But there are things that are really necessary. There are things that kind of come to the core of what it means to follow the Lord. And that's laid out for us in the church, right? It's laid out for us in the profession of faith or oath of fidelity that pastors have to make when they assume their leadership roles. It's laid out for us in things like the catechism and documents of magisterial authority, whether it's Vatican II or Trent. And, there are foundational truths that we have to be united on. And we have to navigate areas where the culture pulls us away from that or other opinions pull us away from that and really seek to find unity on things that are necessary.
Absolutely. It's interesting because just the quote, right? And what is doubtful freedom and what is necessary unity? I think we get those mixed up quite a bit. I just see there's been so many things in these last few years that truly are matters of prudential judgment. Right? It could be this, it could be that.
All the COVID stuff, right?
Yeah, a lot of that. And yet I think we've pursued, perhaps with many of us have pursued matters of prudential judgment with almost the authoritative, like, no, this is what is necessary, right? This is not what is doubtful. And I think that's led to a lot more division, right? And then conversely, in things that we must be united in, right? As you say, that a positive faith that our church has passed down from age to age, right? In that, some of us take parts of that as optional, right?
Yeah, and we don't have a lot of Christological heresies like the early church had, or Trinitarian heresies.
Right.
We have lots of moral confusion, right? And that's generally where we see this happening. And this is the beauty, the genius. We need to do like a whole 5-part podcast on the theology of the body at some point, Beth. That's the beauty of the theology of the body that John Paul has taken from, what Paul VI said in Humani Vitae, calling on bishops to expound upon this beautiful teaching of the church about human sexuality. John Paul started that as the Archbishop of Krakow and then took it up in greater kind of authority as the Holy Father, as the Pope, and taught, from our relationship with God and from our understanding of, human anthropology or Christian anthropology, how we can understand the moral life in a way that's consonant with the tradition for 2,000 years and palatable, can speak into the experience of 21st century people. And it's just so beautiful and so life-giving. And I think that's where our church is, really where I think the challenges are going to be going forward and are right now about in things necessary and what is necessary unity. And then in all things, charity.
In all things, charity.
So even when people disagree with me on things that are necessary, or even when people, maybe disagree significantly on things that are doubtful, and I find it difficult to understand their point of view.
Still charity.
Charity needs to be the crown of my virtue in life. Right? It needs to be the foundation and the pinnacle of all virtue.
Right.
That I love this person. I care about this person. I want this person to be with me in heaven. Right. And God wants to perfect me by desiring that here and now, even when I don't like them, even when I don't see their opinion, even when they're annoying me, or, that like in all things, charity has to prevail.
Yeah. Father Jacques-Philippe had a great comment, and I think it was Searching for and Maintaining Peace, where he was talking about how if we find ourselves becoming impatient with someone with either a true fault or just something we disagree with, right? Yeah. That perhaps we should consider the patience of the Lord, who is showing patience towards this person and towards you in your own messiness, right? Like, how do we, that charity in that sense could also be a form of patience towards the other. Right.
Oh, that's so good and so convicting, Beth. Man, I struggle with patience so much that, it's just a great reminder that God is infinitely patient with me.
Infinitely patient.
And like, okay, as he is patient with me, I need to be, whether it's in traffic or whether it's with someone who's, disagreeing with something that's foundational, or someone that I just, it's just difficult for me to interact with.
Yeah. Once I was in a meeting and I was just really struggling. And so I just started writing over and over. And again, just they couldn't see what I was writing in my notebook, but I just kept writing beloved Beth, beloved, and then their name, beloved Beth, beloved, their name, beloved Beth, beloved, their name, over and over and over again. As I was listening, because I needed the exercise to remind myself, I am loved. You are loved. We can disagree, but I am loved and you are loved.
Yeah.
That's the foundation of this,
I think that was a meeting you and I were having.
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
Is that what it was? Okay, so our first principle in what is doubtful, freedom. In what is necessary, unity.
In all things, charity. Yeah, right.
We talked about another principle too.
Yeah, humility and openness to the other. Yeah. Humility and openness to the other, right? That as we do the work that the Lord's called us to and just live our lives, that evangelization puts us into contact with people who are a gift to us. And I think you said not just to be receptacles, to receive our wisdom, which I think is excellent, right? I think just when I think of humility and openness to the other, I think like, are we even listening to people who disagree with us? Yeah. I think a lot of like Facebook has decided we don't need to listen to people who disagree with us. Right. They have filtered out every dissonant opinion. They already know what ours are somehow, even if we don't post them, just based on how long we spend reading different things. They already know what we think. And so when we're walking through the world, encountering people who disagree with us in real life, we are experiencing something that the digital space has removed from our experience altogether. Yeah. So the skill set is not something we're learning digitally, where we're engaging and spending most of our time. It's something we're learning incarnationally when we are physically together.
Yeah. No, you are spot on. I think this is one of the great reasons why we should manage our digital time wisely, right? Because that doesn't mimic or prepare us for
the real
life.
World. It does not. No.
And not that the digital world is unreal, because I'm still accountable for my actions there, and still need to be a good witness and need to be virtuous there. But the place where God most wants you to be spending your time and growing in holiness is in person-to-person interaction, right? Because we're made incarnational. We're made, flesh and spirit.
That's right.
And it's through the things of this world that we encounter God most perfectly, not digitally. We don't receive the sacraments digitally. We receive the sacraments in real life. And the sacramental identity is how God made his church, that he comes to us in physical things. And we encounter each other in physical ways, seeing each other and bumping into each other. And that's going to be where, I need to be especially humble, right? And open to another person.
Yeah, and the wisdom they'll give us, right? Even the most unlikely sources.
Yeah, there's a beautiful quote from C.S. Lewis's The Weight of Glory that I'm not as organized as you are, so I don't have the quote
I've got the full quote.
Do you have the quote?
Let's
read it. Yeah.
The dullest and most uninteresting person you talk to may one day be a creature which, if you saw it now, you would be strongly tempted to worship. or else a horror and a corruption such as you now meet, if at all only in a nightmare. All day long, we are in some degree helping each other to one or other of these destinations. There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. It is immortals whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit, immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. Next to the Blessed Sacrament, your neighbor is the holiest object presented to your senses. Wow.
Yeah.
Little humility, huh? Maybe we could be a little more humble as we interact with each other.
Yeah, it's pulling back some of the curtain of this world and pointing to eternity, right? That the person I'm annoyed with on the road, in the grocery store, who took my pew at church, or for a lot of our lay ecclesial ministers, the person, the angry parent, or the person I need to kind of serve in this situation, has the weight of eternity within them. Yeah. And as C.S. Lewis says, if we saw their destiny, it would be so great, we would be tempted to worship it. And for those who turn away from the Lord, if we saw the destiny or the decision of those who have rejected him, it would terrify us. Yeah. Yeah. We have never met a mere mortal.
No.
So be humble with other people. Numero 3.
Having the lens of evangelization when we're in moments of disunity or in moments of conflict, where our focus is not just to win the argument and not just trying to defend in kind of a defensive posture, but really thinking of evangelization in this person's heart and the overall mission of evangelization.
Yeah, I think about that for our witness too, right? Just thinking about like John Paul saying what a scandal it is for disunity. I got it right this time. The disunity is the scandal. That, part of why I need to seek unity is to grow in virtue myself. Part of it is out of service to the other person, right? That they deserve it. But another part of it is because everyone is watching. People see it, right? And we're not meant to live our lives like it's a show, of course. We need to be authentic. But part of being authentic is knowing that, as a Catholic and especially working for the church, I have a responsibility for how people see me interacting with other people. So I need to seek unity as a witness to the world. As, absolutely. As a saint in the making. And I think that's one of the most important evangelizing characteristics is to say, okay, how do we see people working? As a priest, I wear my clerics and like, it's very, very easy to see like, man, that guy's a jerk right now. Or the times when I'm not a jerk, hopefully they see that too. But all of us are called to be that way.
That's right.
We're all of us are called to be ambassadors for Christ. And St. Paul says, I become all things to all men, so that I might save some of them. Absolutely,
yeah. There's a quote in the Catechism that haunts me a bit. It says that believers have no more than a little to do with the rise of atheism, through the lukewarmness of their faith and the tepidity of their witness. And yes, right?
Yeah.
The people are watching. There's a beautiful singer, Audrey Assad, who has just the most gorgeous, haunting songs. And she recently left the Catholic Church. Partly because of disunity, I think. And I'm sure many other things, but I just thought, how are we?
I've followed a little bit of her journey and, just seen what people have showed me from social media and looked up some of it myself. And it's really sad. And it's been over the last couple of years, right? Or maybe the last year or so. And just to say, okay, what would lead someone like that away from Christ?
Right. Yeah. Who understood and knew and sang of the intimacy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
I think to move to another point, I think another point for or principle to cultivate unity is giving people a good listening, which I know you think is funny.
It does because I think of it. You know what you need? A good old fashioned listening to. I don't know why. It's just a funny way we were talking about it.
I know. So. Yeah. I used to do tech support and it was a little sleepy sometimes, the calls I would get. And every once in a while I'd get an angry caller. And I really loved it because it would just woke me right up. and people would be so surprised that I wouldn't get mad back at them. I would just listen and be try to be kind and reflect back what I'm hearing you say, and I think today, obviously, if we just look at COVID has frayed everyone. Right. And everyone's experience of it has been so different. And how do we listen to people who are hurting right now, right? People who are coming to the church and We had someone just walking out mention to a greeter, some offhand complaint about how church used to be sacred and I don't know what it is anymore, something. And the greeter wasn't sure what to say. So she said, okay, thanks for letting me know. And I thought, shoot, I have 100 more questions I'd like to ask. So we could give her the good listening, right? Because we can't I don't even know what she was upset about truly that day, Right. So how do we listen to people instead of kind of being afraid of their anger? How can we listen to it and then we can't offer anything until we've listened.
Did you see the movie Crash that came out maybe 10 years ago or something?
Yes.
Yeah. And I was thinking about that, the way that you hear the saying, hurt people.
Yes.
And
I think movie's a great demonstration of that.
Yeah, I think it shows. And that there's a lot of racial tensions within that between different ethnic groups there. But it did show people who have been hurt or are dealing with something take it out on other people.
That's right.
And as the church, and this can be a delicate balance, we don't want to enable abusive behavior. We don't want to tolerate things that are, that people shouldn't have to tolerate. But there is a bit of the ordinary absorbing of people's anger and giving it to the Lord that all of us need to do because we can't respond in kind. Right. And we just have to sometimes receive their hurt and bring it to the Lord for them. And that takes a spiritual maturity to say, okay, at what point do I need to intervene and say, you can't do this anymore, right? I'm not your punching bag.
Right.
You don't just get to take everything out on me.
Right.
But also to say, I'm not going to return in kind or kind of, say you can't be here because of one aspect of anger or one opinion kind of thing. So I think that takes a little spiritual maturity for us to know how to do that and to absorb it and then not hold on to it ourselves, right?
Yeah.
But to go before the Lord, especially on our knees and say, Jesus, I don't want this. I give it to you.
Yeah. Jesus, you take care of it.
Yeah.
Such a great prayer.
Yeah. We talked about forgiveness as well.
Yeah, forgiveness.
Right? That we all have reasons to be hurt. And, these aren't totally distinct from each other, right? They flow from each other. But we need to let go of our own hurt and let go of maybe anger that we have. And some of that can be, righteous anger, things that were not done properly. I've heard a lot of people talk about why did I not learn this beauty of the faith when I was younger?
Right.
Why did I not learn this until now, right?
Right.
And in a lot of ways, you talk about believers have not a little to do with the rise of atheism.
Right.
That people do have a right to know that. And in some ways, there was an injustice done to them.
Yeah.
But sometimes the anger is just a difference of opinions. You didn't win the day with what you wanted to do. And and we have to give that to the Lord. We have to let go of that anger so that it doesn't destroy us.
What is it? Resentment is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die.
Yeah.
A quote attributed to many different people, but also to St. Augustine. So,
oh, really?
Yeah, I think he probably did say it. But lots of modern people are attributed with the quote.
Yeah.
I had a friend that I met through ministry at my last parish, and generally kind of an angry person when we started out, of getting to know each other. And then we had 1 week where the content was on forgiveness, and she just, it just all fell out, and there was all this anger and, and when she was able to let it go and truly choose forgiveness, she visibly looked different. She walked different. It changed everything for her. So how much lighter would our steps be, right? If we really ask the Lord to help us forgive.
Yeah.
And let it go, especially the last few years of all the different things that people are holding on to, right?
Right.
Difficult leadership decisions they didn't like, or the way things went, or there's obviously so many innumerable things.
Yeah.
Right. Even conversations or misunderstandings that never took place. Like there was never a conversation about it.
Right. Yeah. And even, I've heard from not a few people about I can't believe the church closed.
Right.
At that time.
That's very, yes.
Or
how could they have abandoned us, right?
Yeah, people feeling abandoned. Or I can't believe they opened so early. When it was opening in May, after 2 months.
Right.
I can't believe this is reckless.
Right.
And, okay, it's okay to disagree with decisions that are made, but the Archbishop and other people who have to make these decisions, they're not easy decisions.
No, they're very difficult.
It's it takes a bit of humility, as we talked about earlier, to say, okay, I don't know every aspect of this. And maybe I feel like It's not what I would have done. But man, it's not helpful to hold on to anger about that. We were talking about like the way we can get locked in and seeing people's faults as their defining characteristics. Right. I don't know if I talked about this here, but I had this profound experience in seminary where one of the seminarians, one of my classmates, was just driving me nuts. Right. I could not stand him. And I was in spiritual direction and I was talking to my spiritual director, sharing with him all of his faults.
Very mature.
Yeah, exactly. And he goes, Steve, is there anything good about him? And I thought for a minute, and I said, no, there's absolutely nothing good about him.
Okay.
And he goes, all right, well, do you see the problem? And it was this great wake-up call that I had created a caricature of him in my mind of just being defined by his faults. And so he said, well, you need to pray that you see him the way the Lord sees him and see not just the challenges you have with him, but see his gifts and opportunities and see the blessing he is. And Beth, that radically changed the way I saw him, right? There were still times he got on my nerves, and I'm sure I got on his nerves. But man, it just broke me out of this mold of only noticing his faults. Right. And that can happen with leaders so many times, right? People see their leaders, or it can happen for leaders seeing other people. You only see their faults. Right. And man, what an impoverished way to go through life. I'm so grateful for this priest who was like, wake up. This is not who he is. And like, you've been blinded by this, and you need to ask the Lord for eyes to see.
Absolutely.
So we talked about 5 when we met beforehand, and then you came with this great 6th one.
Yeah,
so what's our last one?
Yeah, for cultivating unity, I think intentionally spending time with people. Pope Francis keeps talking about how we need to waste time with each other. Yeah. He had a quote in Gaudete et Exsultate, 141. Thanks for the reference. I didn't write down the number, and Father Steve looked it up. Yeah. When we live apart from others, it is very difficult to fight against concupiscence, the snares and temptations of the devil, and the selfishness of the world. Bombarded as we are by so many enticements, we can grow too isolated, lose our sense of reality and inner clarity, and easily succumb. Growth in holiness is a journey in community, side by side with others, which describes to me these last few years, right? When we live apart from others, it's very difficult to fight against concupiscence, right? We just are left with ourselves. Yeah. And now we're coming back into community, into these relationships, right? These encounters day by day where there's going to be some friction, and that friction is intended to help us grow in holiness.
I'll see your Pope Francis post-synodal apostolic exhortation
and raise me one.
And raise you a Vatican II document where Lumen Gentium talks about this, that like when Christ came to save us, he didn't choose to save us individually. Yeah. He chose to save us as a people, as a church. And this comes back to kind of the whole notion of unity.
That's right.
Is that he wanted us to be kind of made holy together.
Yeah.
So I don't go off on my own and become holy. Part of how I become holy, and this is just classic spiritual advice, right? How do I become holy? By doing the things I need to do in my daily life, right? Like by being a great mom, being a great wife, doing the work you need to do, and like caring for the people that God has put into your life. Yeah. How do I become holy as a priest? By being generous with God's people and doing the things that they need. Sacramentally, teaching, leadership ways, however, right? That I don't do it off by myself somewhere else, but I do it in community with others.
Yeah. I think in parish ministry and in work too, I think this one is important because I think our relationships, especially in COVID, became more transactional. Right? Because we couldn't be together. So it's silly to get on a Zoom call and be like, so how are your kids? Like, I can see your kids. They're in the background. Let's get to it. I need the form. Do you have it? Great. Let's go. And so I think it is kind of a slowing down of the car when you ask a personal question, you know? And it's easy for us just to do the work and the work and the work, right? But I think unity also comes when we have those relationships with each other. I just wanted to highlight a bit from the article you read earlier, the Reconciliation and Penance on unity, just as kind of a closing thought. He said, unity, if it is to be the fruit and expression of true reconciliation, is meant to be based neither upon a disguising of the points that divide, nor upon compromises, which are easy as they are superficial and fragile. Unity must be a result of a true conversion of everyone, the result of mutual forgiveness. A true conversion of everyone. Yeah. If we want to see unity, it's going to require a true conversion of everyone. And that starts with us.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a way, I don't know. I don't want to go too off topic here. yeah. This isn't fully formed, so take it for what it is. There's a way we can get into a stalemate because I don't want to compromise unless I know you're willing to compromise, right? Like I'm willing to meet you halfway, but I don't want to go halfway and then now you expect me to keep going, right?
Yeah.
And I think that happens in so many ways, with the war in Ukraine going on right now, with Russia and Ukraine. I was just thinking about like reading some of the church's teaching about, how war is always a loss and how it requires this true commitment to peace on both sides. And the way there is this bit of like, how do I navigate that with a prophetic stance to seek peace in places where there's still conflict and disunity? And I don't have that fully figured out in my mind, right? And I don't want to draw too much of an analogy between that and the disunity we have. But it does take a boldness, a confidence, a radicality to say, I'm willing to seek unity. I don't quite know where it's going to go, but I'm going to be the first person who's vulnerable here or who's reaching out to say, okay, we need to solve this. Instead of let's just ignore the problem or let's create some superficial compromise. So that's some of my half-baked thoughts at the end there.
I like it. It's a lot to think about.
So...
Father Steve, you seem like a guy who would know the names of a lot of flowers. I think our listeners would agree that Father Steve is probably an expert botanist. And I'd like to hear some flowers.
I was telling Beth that part of my job here at the seminary has been to help coordinate the Holy Week stuff. And that includes the flowers we normally get delivered. And I was talking to the florist and she was giving us our order from previous years, and I was trying to type it down, and I could not get, I just don't know these. So let's have a little fun. Let's do a little flowers.
How about I name a flower, then you name a flower. We'll see who runs out first.
Okay.
Great. I'm going to go first. I'm going to take daffodils.
Is that a flower?
Get out of here. Come on.
Ron, can you independently verify? Ron agrees. Okay. This is like Scrabble.
This is the first play. You're arguing with the first play. We need a little more unity up in here.
Good point. Roses.
Tulips.
Carnations.
Ooh, carnations. Lilies.
Azaleas, which I don't know how to spell.
And I don't know what they are. Hyacinth. Our listeners are laughing.
Roses.
They can think of, didn't you already say roses?
Yellow roses.
No, you can't have the different colors of roses. Forget
that. Did we say lilies?
I said lilies. Yeah. They put you in charge of ordering the flowers.
It's kind of a passive role of receiving it. Hydrangeas.
Ooh, nice. Irises. You're looking for a confirmation on irises?
Isn't that a part of the eye?
No. Yes.
Okay.
Now other people are mad at me. Okay. Yes, it is. But irises.
All of our optometrists listening.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of them.
Mums, which I'm sure is short for something. But
I don't know. They're so ugly. Peonies.
I'm out.
Did I win? I won with peonies.
Nothing. I got nothing. Ron, any that we're missing?
Yeah, he's still laughing. You asked him to fact check irises. All right, folks. This has been the Encounter Grow Witness podcast, a podcast by and for people working in the Archdiocese of Detroit. Let's be better fishers of men together. Subscribe. Tell more people to listen to this podcast so that more people can do better ministry together.
Amen.